So, what are we doing today? We are doing two things in this video. We are consolidating the bloom, and then we are refining the bloom, which is also known as wroughting the bloom, and that's why it's called wrought iron. We're taking the iron and we are wroughting it. So, I'll explain both sections as separate things because they are completely separate processes and they do completely separate things. Right now, we are working with pucks. Because I use the crucible method to simulate a hearth furnace, we have pucks the size of the crucible, which is actually quite handy. The guy who is actually sponsoring this whole endeavor wants a puko knife, and so I need small pieces of wrought iron at the end of this to be able to make that puko knife. So working it in these individual pucks is actually going to make that process easier, rather than me trying to work one big bloom. Because remember, when it came out of the bloomery furnace, there's a lot of mass there. It's much easier to work with something you could hold in your hand because it's more workable in the forge, but also it's a much clearer vision of what's going on. There's some really top-notch, great footage on YouTube about showing people consolidating blooms, but when the bloom is that big, it's very hard to actually see what's going on, and so doing it with these little pucks is really going to help that. So you'll basically follow the journey of one of the three pucks that we managed to get out of the smelt. So I'm going to focus on one, get it done, show you the process, and then I'll go and do the other two off camera, because filming this process while doing it is very difficult. So what we've got is still bloom. Let me grab it. Here we go. So I realized that I was using, in my excitement, probably incorrect nomenclature. I was switching between sintering and consolidating when I was talking about what the hearth process did. The hearth process does not consolidate the bloom, it just sinters it. So this is still very much bloom, not consolidated bloom. So what do I mean by that? This is quite heavy, which means that the core is probably pretty good, but you can see that surface is all sort of crackly and void filled, and still has, you can see, visible slag in it. One myth is that in order to refine wrought iron, you need to get rid of all of the slag. And actually, that's quite incorrect. You want slag in there. What you want to do is control both the arrangement and the amount of slag. And we'll get to that because that's in the refinement process. But in the consolidation process, what we want to do is continue to bleed off some of the excess slag that is still here, which, like, you saw how brittle it was. I could break it off. Not really. I tried. There's pieces that are fused into this, because this is just bloom. This is what bloom looks like. It is a mix of, you can see the iron crystals in it, but essentially, we've all heard of metals having a grain structure. This doesn't really have one yet. What it is a mix of iron, slag, and voids. And those voids, you can think of kind of like a kitchen sponge, where most of it is, or not most of it, but a lot of it is pockets of air, and you can kind of squish it down into a more solid block. And that's kind of what we're going to be doing with this. I did a little bit of it when we tipped it out of the crucible. Did a little bit, but my goal wasn't to try and really consolidate it there. It was just to get into a workable mass so that I can just hold this in tongs and do this in the forge. So what we want to do is, at forge welding temperatures, with the aid of a bit of flux, we want to squish this into itself until it won't squish no more. It's one of those things that you got to sort of play it by feel. As we try and collapse it, some of it's going to forge weld shut, like those air bubbles in there. We need to try and work them out to the outsides, those voids, and press them shut. As it releases those gases and as the liquid slag comes off, that's going to sort of potentially spray everywhere, although with one this small, we'll be doing smaller hits, which is good. If you have a big bloom, you see huge amounts of sparks and slag fly off of them because they have to do quite big hits to get the impact needed to actually consolidate them in the middle. Whereas working a little hobby-sized one like this is not much work. You don't have to hit very hard for the penetration to go all the way through. Basically, we want to smooth this out as much as possible. So my goal in consolidating it is going to be taking it on its end and squishing it down that way, and then putting it on its end and squishing it down that way, and then putting it on another end and squishing it down. And I'm going to gauge how much it goes into itself and how much it spreads when I do that. So if it spreads by the amount that it should by squishing it down at the top, that means that there's not many voids. But if it squishes down into itself but doesn't really spread out very much, that means I'm closing up voids. And it's very difficult to actually describe this, but you will have almost like a dialogue, especially if you are experienced at forging. With every hammer strike you do on it, you will get feedback from the bloom. You'll get a sense of how much of the strike was hitting something solid and how much of it was squishing stuff. The bloom will kind of speak to you in that way, and you will speak to it by hitting it in different places with different levels of strength. Sometimes you'll just be doing little taps, sometimes you'll actually feel it solid enough to give it a good whack and really set those voids down solid again. But the other dialogue that will happen is that this is still going to want to fall apart because it doesn't really have any discernible grain structure, and it's very unevenly distributed in there. There's little pockets of carbon, there's little pockets of iron, there's little pockets of slag, and some parts of it are going to be slaggier than others. And you can actually see it when it first plopped out of the crucible. There's this sort of solid mass, the 2/3 on the left is very together, and then the very far right is very together, but in the middle connecting them is a very sort of soggy bit. That was because there was more slag in that bit than there was at the either end, and you can kind of still see it on here right there. That's where I tried to join them. So where they are joined, I know already from that initial sort of mini consolidation that I did that that's going to be a weak spot. And so if I were to start striking it on the top here, once I get this up to forge welding heat, there's very good odds that it's going to fall apart. So I'm going to try and put it up like that and hit it into itself to forge weld down this way. So I'll probably just overlay footage of me doing this and then narrate it afterwards. But that's essentially what I'm doing. I'm trying to close up as many of the voids as possible. I'm trying to get my surface finish as nice as possible. And I'm going to be doing it all at forge welding heat. I'm going to use my infrared thermometer, and I'm going to make sure that I'm sitting at around 1200 to 1300 degrees on this. And that's the only temperature that's really going to be valid to work this. As soon as it starts getting down towards the reds or into a dull orange, I'm not going to be doing much other than changing surface finish. So I want to reflux it, get it back in the forge, and do this over and over and over again. So I will know when it's done because every direction that I could possibly forge on it, it will feel solid, and then it'll be time to wrought. So let's get this consolidated first, and you can see it happen. All right, so we've got it in the forge, and it's heating up with the forge. We want to try and bring it right up to that like 1200, 1300 degrees Celsius range using the infrared thermometer. You'll recognize it as just forge welding temperatures, but it will look different on a bloom to what it would look like with, say, carbon steel. On a bloom, forge welding temperatures look like bright orange, whereas on carbon steel it looks like a yellow in most sort of ambient environments. So you'll learn pretty quickly, and if you have a thermometer or like a thermocouple, you'll be able to actually tell when you're at temperature. Without that though, you're just going to have to go off feel, and if you've forge welded before, you'll know what feel I'm talking about. Be gentle with it. Definitely don't hit on it while it's too cold, and like I said, it's going to want to fall apart at this stage. We're trying to get to the point where it's a lot more homogeneous and won't try and fall apart. And that's really it. We want to hold it in a reducing atmosphere, so you want that dragon's breath coming out of the forge, because that will help prevent scale buildup. So there's certain things to not necessarily expect, but prepare for. We're doing everything small scale, so it's some things that should happen might not happen. Kind of like the slag dripping off in the foundry. Our bloom's very small, so normally driving out liquid slag under hammer blows, if you squeeze out a pocket, it's going to shoot out and you get, quite a bit of a spray. So be safe, be prepared for that. It's no different really to when you're forging Damascus. If you've heavily fluxed and there's flux in between the layers and you compress those layers, it's going to squirt out the sides and spray. Just be prepared for that. On a little one this small, probably won't get that, but it's good to prepare just in case. The whole thing is going to be monitoring temperature. If you're forging on it, it needs to be at forge welding temperature. As soon as it drops below there, flux it back in the forge. So you just keep doing that until you feel the difference. I'm hoping on camera you can see the difference as I forge it, but I think it's going to be mostly a feel thing, so I'll try my best to depict it. Because I'm going to be concentrating, I've got my tripod set up to just point at my anvil. But yeah, it's one of those things that you really got to be there, you got to do it, which is why you should try it. One pitfall you might fall into is one that people commonly fall into when doing Damascus stacks. This is about the size of a small Damascus stack, and the outside's going to look like it's at temperature, and you're going to try and forge on it, but the core hasn't been brought up to temperature yet. The core takes longer to get up to temperature than the outside does. It's like cooking a steak. You see at the outside, it'll look cooked, but the inside might still be raw. Some people like it that way, but in terms of forge welding, you need the whole thing to be even the whole way through. And the best way to do that is if you've got a forge floor, when you move the object, if there's a shadow on the forge floor, that object is still cooler than your forge environment. If you move the object and there's no shadow, you're good. I'm using a postbox forge, so there's no forge floor, so I'm just doing it by eye, but it's just something for you to keep in mind. So you can see I've consolidated one end partially, but we're now getting it up to that temperature where the slag that's still in there really wants to become liquid. So this is the real risk of it falling apart. I managed to break off a chunk of the slag in the first heat. It weren't quite hot enough, but at the same time, most of that was just slag that was encrusted on the outside. So the bloom's going to start getting a little softer now because it's quite small, and there's not really much mass to help hold it together, so I have to be careful. Little delicate hits, small rounds, only a few hits per round, and we'll get there. Okay, so that section that we talked about where there was a blob of slag between the two good ends, that finally broke apart. So we've got that slag out of there now, and we've got a small clean piece and a big clean piece. Clean, as clean as bloom could be. So what I've done now is I've sort of flattened it out into a little mini disc, and I've laid it on top in a little bit of flux, and we'll just work it back into the piece. This is probably going to happen several times. This is part of work and bloom, and you just keep flattening it out, folding it back in it'll be fine. You can probably see what I'm doing. I'm trying to get it into more or less a bar-like form with nice smooth sides. I'm never going to get perfectly smooth sides, but that's basically what I'm trying to achieve. But I'm not limiting myself to that. If I see that it wants to try and break apart, I'm flipping it, I'm doing whatever it needs to do in order to get it into a shape that will hold together. So you can kind of see one end of it now is getting pretty consolidated. It's basically, you can tell because it stops trying to open up while you're hammering on it. The other end, the part that I'm holding with the tongs though, hasn't been being worked as much, and so it's now starting to be a problem. So I'll flip it, hold it by the good side and do the same thing. And I'll just keep flipping it as this happens. And each time it starts tearing itself apart at the held end, it will happen slightly less. Until eventually it doesn't happen at all, and that's when I know that it's consolidated. But you can see that some of the hits that I'm doing now, even just a few heats in, are already much stronger than when I first started because it was very goopy. It's getting less goopy now and more solid, and that's what you want to see. That means that we're draining the slag out of it and got more iron to work with. The physical size has shrunk a bit, which is good. We were expecting, like we talked about a 70, get about 60-70% of the final mass. Yeah, we should have a nice little bar of iron at the end of it, but remember, this is just consolidation. We then have to refine. So once I've got it into a consolidated bar, I will flatten it out slightly, just enough to be able to cut and fold the bar down. But that process has to be done in a very specific way, which I'll explain in a bit. Let's go back to consolidating and not put the cart before the horse. Right now we're at the stage that all we're trying to do is close the voids down. There is still, we haven't really bled off too much slag, but there's a noticeable amount that's kind of coming off of it as we go. But there's still enough in there to keep it sort of soft. Remember we talked about, oh, you may not have seen the Instagram reel, but it's kind of like meat when you're trying to dry out meat. The slag is like the water, and a slice of meat that's still got a lot of water in is very floppy. But if you get rid of the water, it gets firm. Same thing with this. When we get rid of more slag, it firms up. So that process, well, it's going to stay soggy like this until we start getting to the refining process, where we are going to be repeatedly folding it. That folding process and fluxing process is going to really start minimizing the slag. But for now, it's still going to be kind of soft to work with at this scale. If it were bigger, it wouldn't be as much. The outside would still be tacky, but not the whole thing like this. But this just doesn't have the mass for that. This is a little hobby-sized puck. So we'll just keep going, and it's consolidating really nicely, and that surface finish is getting smoother and smoother, as you can see at the end there. So we'll just keep going until I'm happy with it. Trying to narrate as I go, but every time you see me pause in hammering and stop and look closely at it, I'm noticing somewhere where it's trying to open up. And if you spot it nice and early, you'll kind of see like the black top surface layer and a crack, almost like you see in the movies when the earth cracks and opens up and there's magma down there. You'll kind of see that starting to form. You don't want to let those get too wide. When you get one, you flux it, put it back into the forge to let it sit and bring up to temperature, and then you want to hit it at an angle that will close that back up. And that's what I'm just doing over and over and over again. You'll see the heats are really quick because I'm just bouncing back and forth and only getting a half a dozen good hits in. But we want to be careful because this thing at this point, until it's consolidated, just wants to fall apart and ruin our day. But as you will have seen, it's already a lot more solid just after, what, half a dozen or so heats. This process is just heat, beat, repeat, just very carefully, and every time we do it, it gets more and more consolidated, more and more solid, and more ready for refinement. And this process just repeats again and again until I'm happy with it. When I can hit it and feel that every part of that block is pretty solid, and I could put a little bit of chutzpah behind a hammer hit without it breaking apart, I'll know that it's consolidated enough to be able to handle the folding. So I'll save you seeing it, and after I've done like 500 more heats, we'll start with the refining process, the wroughting process, which I'll explain when we get there.
One eternity later.
Okay, so it's feeling pretty solid. We lost a little bit of size, but it's still a nice looking chunk of iron. Still got a lot of slag in it, and still every so often, if I work it too hard, wants to fall apart. Well, I say fall apart, it wants to form a crack. But it's kind of acting like really low quality raw iron at the moment in that way. Like, if you've ever worked with like a really bad piece of wrought iron, it just kind of wants to peel apart. But wrought iron normally has like a grain structure that runs one way. So wrought iron misbehaves and tears apart when you do things that put lateral stress on that grain, and that makes it peel apart. Our refined or consolidated bloom piece doesn't actually have a grain structure yet. That's what we've got to give it in the refining process. So because of that, it's the weak points are sort of going everywhere. So if you forge it in one way too hard, it's going to want to start splitting open if there's a weak point. So the process we're going to do now is to draw it down and maintain every time we draw it the same direction. And we'll draw it down, fold it back on itself, forge weld it down, and draw it out, pull it back, forge weld it down, draw it down, always in the same direction. And what that's going to do is form the residual slag from blobs, which are very weak, into these sort of long stringer type, like tendrils running through it, like wood grain. And that process is pretty mundane, but the entire time you do it, I mean, most blacksmiths know how to draw something out, fold it, forge weld it, draw it out. Like, that isn't complex, it's just repetitive and it takes a lot of time. What we're going to do with this one, though, is do that process with something that in the early stages really wants to tear apart. So we've got to do it very carefully. So for the drawing, I'm going to move to my fly press, and I'm just going to take very gentle bites on each heat and inspect it, make sure none of those little lava valleys are forming, and if they are, I've got to take it back to the anvil and by hand flux it, forge weld it back. And I'm just going to keep drawing it down until it's a narrower bar that's longer, and I'm going to maintain that orientation. And then I'm going to flip it, hot cut it, flux it, fold it over, and do an old school cut and fold forge weld. That's basically the next process. But in these early stages, especially for the first fold, I've got to be really careful that it doesn't pull apart. Really careful. So each fold that I do successfully and forge weld is going to make it slightly stronger. And you know, you kind of want to do at least like 4 to 6 folds really to get some sort of usable wrought iron that you'd be able to forge with. But right now you really wouldn't be able to forge with it. whatever grain structure is in there is going all over the place, so that you never know where you can safely hit it. So we want to very gently pull it down into a longer bar and do our first forge weld. I'm going to use the forge press on this just because I can get even pressure on this. The surface finish is really good now after just repeatedly doing what we've been doing during the consolidation. It's still got some pits and valleys and things, but they're shallow now. They're really shallow. So I've got to give it quite a bit more effort when I hit it to actually make a dent. So a lot of those little voids are gone, but some of them will still be in there, and it's still going to want to try and pull apart. So that's what we're going to do next. We'll set the tripod up at the fly press, and you'll be able to see me taking those careful little bites, and every so often you'll see me freak out and, and run over to forge weld it back closed. And that'll be what we'll do. I'll try and capture one of those as well and give you a bit of a montage, because if I try and show you this real time, this video is going to be 2 hours long. So we'll try and keep it snappy, and I'll come back when we're ready to do the first cut and fold, and I'll show you how we're going to do that. You can see immediately it wants to start splitting. So I thought it was just forge scale on the outside, but no, there was a split. So it's back in. We'll weld that close, and we'll try again. May have pulled a little too hard. It's feeling pretty solid though around that. But yeah, this is part of the process. The thing I'd like to highlight is I have an open air forge, and that much ambient light is making it look quite cool on the camera. It's to my eyes, it's like a yellow. You really want this to be screaming. You want this to be in that 1200 to 1400 degrees Celsius range. So I am checking it because of the ambient light. It's very bright today with my thermometer. So don't let the on-screen colors fool you. The temperatures are right. And it's important that you monitor them, because if you're not forge welding as you go, this thing's really going to want to pull apart fast. You may have noticed through this whole process I'm putting a lot of effort into keeping a nice even surface texture on it, and that's because of those cracks that form. It was actually a tip, I can't remember which of the things I read about this when I was studying. There was a really good tip of keeping it as smooth as you can with planishing hits, because when those cracks form or it wants to delam, even before they happen, you can actually see the color differential in the surface of flatter bloom. And when they do open up, they become very, very clear, like a lightning bolt through it when it's open. If your surface is really sort of janky, you can't see it. So that's of course going to be hard to do with a really big bloom. We're luckily working with a very small one. And so I'm taking the time to actually do planishing passes with the flat dies. I'll take it to the anvil and hammer it out as flat as I can, because it helps me see those things before they become a real problem. This thing has tried to pull apart now like 3 times. And yeah, if you spot it early, it's easy to fix. It's just, it takes a lot of patience and a lot of time and a lot of effort. But we're about ready for the first fold. And we're going to do it old school by hot cutting down most of the way through in the middle and folding it over just through forging. Flux the surface, hammer it down, get it up to forge welding heat, and then forge weld it. You've probably done this before. It's very normal at this point, because you can kind of really hammer on this thing now if you're careful. But this is the first time it's going to really start solidifying, because this process is going to squeeze out even more slag and refine this thing further and further. Unfortunately, doing this process multiple times, you will lose a bit more of it to scale and whatnot, but that's part of it. You know, you pull out a nice big bloom, that doesn't mean you're going to get that much iron. It's just This part and parcel of it. So when you draw it down, you'll notice I left it about ½ an inch because you really still want there to be good thermal mass between those two layers, because at this point it's only going to be ever 2 layers. And I kind of want to stick to that. I want to forge it down to about ½ inch thick again, fold it, forge it down to ½ inch thick again, fold it. But once again, always in the same orientation. I don't want to do it one way then the other way, because when I fold it in half, it's going to be a square. So I need to make sure I keep that orientation right and keep drawing it in the same direction to form those little tendrils of slag that will give it strength. Alright, so we've cut and folded it, nearly tore open while trying to fold it, but it held, enough of it held. Got our flux in there. Now remember, we're about to forge weld it. Let's see if I can get a slow-mo, but this is gonna need a bit more force than you'd normally forge weld with, because there's still a lot of slag inclusions in this steel, and you can kind of see it as the blackening spots. They cool much faster than the iron does. So we need to kind of push through that to get the iron pieces to stick together, and it's probably going to be a dirty weld. It's just how it goes. That's why we're doing multiple, because each one's going to squeeze out more of the slag. But by doing that, it's going to probably want to spray everywhere. Slag at these temperatures is going to be close to a liquid, and we've got a lot of flux in there, and it's just going to spray everywhere. So fire safety, just PPE. I've already got so many little fire fleas that have burnt my hands, and you just get used to it after a while. But definitely eyes, keep aware of your surroundings, keep an extinguisher nearby, because it'll get messy. I have now been burned by more fire fleas. One got into my elbow. It's the worst place because you can't stop hammering. Anyway, I've done that. I did a second round just off camera where I neatened up the sides, put flux in there, just like you would a normal Damascus stack, just to prevent that edge peeling. But I'm leaving the ends kind of raw, and that will indicate to me the direction that I want to go with each refinement. And so we're going to do the same thing. At a forge welding temperature, I'm going to put it through the fly press again and draw it down to about ½ an inch, 10 mil, 3/8, I don't know, around there, still kind of thick, and draw it down to there as a bar once again, and cut and fold and forge weld and do it again. And we'll do that for a piece this small, I reckon 4 times, and hopefully it holds together. We had one end crack open, not where the forge weld happened. The forge weld happened in this axis. It opened in this axis. So when I was doing the sides, I kind of fluxed that and knocked that in as well. But this is going to happen. They're getting fewer and further between at this point. I'll just heat, beat, repeat. Okay, so that's folded now a total of 4 times. I'm wrecked, so I'm gonna hold it there. I've been burned so many times. Like this just spits slag and hot flux and scale and all sorts of mess. So you're gonna get burned, unfortunately, doing this, but that's part of it. It's kind of like it's an awkwardly sized lump at the moment. My plan for this is to make a puko using the sand mine method. So I'm going to draw it down a little thinner and get it into a profile that's a bit more ideal for what I want to do with it. And I'm really going to watch those ends, because those ends are still, they're my indicator of which way the orientation needs to go. And I want to still try and draw it in that orientation, but every so often I'm going to narrow it a bit and just get into a form factor that I like. Try and get the surface finish good, and then we'll give it a grind, maybe slice off the edges to see how our forge welds went, and give it an etch, and I'll show you what it looks like. And so here's what we're left with. Doesn't look like much. It's a lot of work for a very small amount of iron, to be honest, but you can see all of our folds. You can see where chunks have kind of fallen out. I lost a bit there early on. Stayed on the outside. But yeah, this has been, like, I sort of planished the outside, but what's hiding under the scale may look very different. So the first thing we'll do is sort of clean up the edges, dock our dirty ends, maybe even face off the top here, and give it an etch. You can probably tell from the way I'm talking, I'm very tired. The the bloom had a lot of slag in it, but yeah, I'm covered in burns and very tired, so forgive the low energy at the moment. Hard to pick up on camera, but I am actually seeing, there's maybe some unevenness with carbon allocation in there, but a couple of tiny voids, a couple of big voids, to be expected with homemade wrought iron in such a primitive setup. But let's give this an etch, and it should pop a little bit clearer. Let's have a look. Alright, so you can see our layers there. Looks pretty good. And yeah, a lot of inclusions and schmutz in there. You can kind of see, there's probably bits of maybe phosphorus, maybe some silica that's still in there. But it's a cool pattern, and it's more or less homogeneous. We've got little voids through it, so may need a bit more refining, but it worked. We have iron. We have not much. You can see in my fingers. It's a very small piece of iron. But we've still got the rest of the bloom pieces to do first. This was just the best of them. And so even if we get half this again, it's not bad. But yeah, it's a dinky little piece. We're looking at about maybe 1.5 by 3 inches, maybe 2 inches by 3 inches. And yeah, enough for a puko. I'm happy with that. So yeah, I'm pretty tired. It just didn't want to consolidate at first, but we got there in the end. And yeah, it turned into a pretty nice block of iron. It still does have some impurities and things in there that didn't quite get squeezed out. Probably should have folded it a couple more times. And for the purposes of what I'm doing, I'm gonna see if I can persevere with this one. But maybe on the next one, with the next load of bloom chunks, I'll go a little bit further with it to get rid of some more of the extra stuff that's in there. And yeah, it's the same process over and over again, but there's only so many hours in a day, and I'm still trying to make a living while I do this. But you get the idea. It works. It's now iron. It's really not much considering like how much we started with, but we made it from rocks, and the rest of the process of getting more iron or better quality iron is just extrapolation of the processes that we've gone through to get here. So series isn't over yet. We're going to make the knife out of this, and I'll show you how you can work it. And if you're unfamiliar with wrought iron, because essentially it's just bad quality wrought iron right now. So I'll show you how that's done when we make the knife. And then I'm going to do an entire episode that shows you how to optimize this process. So a lot of people who have done blooms before have been coming at me, giving advice and telling me how I'm doing everything wrong. The point of this was not to do everything perfect and achieve optimal yield. The purpose of this series is just to show you the theory from start to finish, every step, why it works, why it happens, and what to do. So I feel like if you can do it with dirt and a hand crank blower and rocks and sand and charcoal, and achieve iron at all, you understand the theory. And if you take that theory and then get to be spoiled with much more optimized processes, electric blowers and better refractories and better quality ore and all that sort of thing, you'll be able to absolutely ace it. It's the way I like to learn. Do things the hard way first, get it working, understand it at a really deep level, then try doing it the right way. So this part of the series will end with me showing you my take on a modern bloomery furnace, because you may not want to go through and build the clay tower and all that sort of thing. So I'm going to show you how to do it with a steel drum, modern refractory and whatnot, electric blowers, a design of how you can do it at home, because you're probably much more likely to want to do it that way. But those instructions will be how to do it really efficiently and get the best possible bloom out of it, and the biggest yield. So I just wanted you to understand the why of everything first, because that's how I roll. I've even done an entire video on it. So that's all for now. We have wrought iron. It's been a long journey. I'm rambling. I'm very tired. This was very physically strenuous, and I'm doing it while not very well. So I'm going to call it for now. See you on the next video, where we actually forge weld this iron around some modern carbon steel and make a knife out of it. See you later.